I've been watching. Good morning. I thought long and hard about today, and I said I hope that my anger at getting COVID the fourth time was not covering an ego that needed to be here. But I have full confidence in Josh. Josh offered to preach today, but I am just resisting letting COVID control more of my life. But if there's anyone who's angry, it's my dear wife, whom I have gifted COVID 4 times. It has gone from me to her every time. It has never gone the other way. But I got it a good way, getting in good trouble. This was my sign at the march in San Diego last week. And so it was there. Unfortunately, I was not as cautious as I should have been. And it is still a real thing. Can I get an amen? I know some people here also have that experience with the continuing endemic. It's no longer the pandemic, it's now endemic. It's just part of life. But I did want to preach today, not for any ego, but I miss you guys. I wasn't here last Sunday because I got it. I was really in the depths of it on Saturday night and Sunday morning. But thank you all for accommodating me today. I'd like to speak to us from the theme, Rocky Christianity. You know, one of the key scholarly insights regarding the New Testament is that the Gospels are not history, but dramatic narratives of a history that none of the readers lived. The people who read the Gospel of Luke never met Jesus. You know, the typical lifespan in the first decade of the Common Era was probably about 30. Now, Jesus was crucified, we think, at 30, 33, so he may not have felt that his sacrifice was all that much. But yes, life expectancy was short. Life was brutal, and life was hard. But so they probably, by the year 70, or 80, maybe even 90, when the Gospel of Luke was published, never met Jesus, only heard about him, and this gospel was their introduction. There are no contemporary writings about the life of Jesus. No newspapers covered the Jesus story. Even Paul, who provides us with the earliest Christian documents, published his first letter some 20 years after the death of Jesus. But what scholars believe, what they also believe, is that there were short, brief anecdotes, short stories about Jesus that circulated even before Paul. And some of those short stories may have achieved written form, but they are lost to us now. The earliest of those stories were the stories about the death and the proclamation or preaching about the resurrection of Jesus. That's why when Paul does write, all he talks about is the death and resurrection. He doesn't tell us about any miracles of Jesus. He doesn't tell us about any sermons of Jesus. He doesn't tell us about anything Jesus said, Jesus did, could care less about how he was born. He preaches Jesus Christ crucified and resurrected. That's the core of the gospel in those early years. And so the gospel writers, starting with that story and working backwards, if you will, from the crucifixion in Jerusalem, the gospel writers crafted a story that moved Jesus from Nazareth up in the north to Jerusalem down south in an action-packed journey of Jesus and his ragtag disciples, coming to confront the powers of oppression at the seat and center of that power, Jerusalem and its temple. And so they start their story with Jesus arriving in Jerusalem, and they portray him as the fulfillment of Israel's hopes and dreams of rescue and restoration. Rescue from the oppressive colonial system of the Romans and the bureaucratic control of the deep state Jewish elites. And they saw in him restoration, the hope of restoration of the kingdom of Israel. And they conferred on Jesus both the courage of David and the wisdom of Solomon. Drawing details for his arrival from the Hebrew prophetic literature, they put him on Zechariah's donkey. Josh, I think Josh is getting typecast. One more time and you got it. So they put him on Zechariah's donkey, and they had the crowd sing, "Hosanna, Hosanna to the one who comes in the name of God. Hosanna to the one who is king." Oops. Now we know why he got crucified. You don't have another king in the empire of Augustus Caesar. But remember, this story is not backward-looking history. No, it was forward-looking Christian propaganda. And that was meant to inspire the reader, the disciples, those first readers, and even you here today, to inspire you to the same kind of heroism and wisdom that Jesus displayed on his entry into the capital city, the city of God, Jerusalem. If I wanted to put this story in terms we might understand, I wouldn't call it Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. No, I would call it Jesus' march on Jerusalem. It was a story that invited the listener, the reader, you, the disciple, to enter into the story and find your place in it. Who would I be? Who would you be? Would I be the obedient disciple that bodaciously commandeered the convertible that Jesus would ride in as the grand marshal of the march? Would you be on the sidelines throwing palm branches and jackets to fill the potholes to give Jesus a smooth ride? Would you be one of the Pharisees telling Jesus, "Quiet them down. We're going to get the attention of the authorities. Make your disciples hush"? But I love Jesus' response to the Pharisees. He said, "Even if I would tell them to be quiet, and even if they obeyed and shut their mouths, the very stones upon which we march would shout out." And there we are. There I am. I want to be one of those irrepressible stones. I want to be one of those rocks that cries out. Yes, that's what Jesus needs today. Jesus is looking for some rocky Christians. What is a rocky Christian? A rocky Christian is one who is not afraid. A rocky Christian is one who will not be quiet when they see injustice. A rocky Christian is one who walks the path that Jesus walks. A rocky Christian carries the cross when Jesus cannot bear the cross alone. A rocky Christian sees what they did to Jesus and keeps marching anyway. If you really want to understand what Palm Sunday was about, just imagine what would happen if millions of people marched on our capital city today. What would happen if millions of pilgrims from all over the country made their way to Washington, D.C. and filled the streets, clogged the streets so that nothing could move, brought the city to a halt, marched on the Capitol demanding that those who are sick should have health care, that those who are poor should receive food and a living wage, that those who are old and other abled and no longer or not able to work would receive the Social Security to which they are due. What if millions of people marched on our capital to demand an end to the war in Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan, which means an end to the military-industrial complex that spends $1 trillion of our federal budget? I'm still looking for that peace dividend. I'm old enough to remember when the Cold War ended and we had all the hopes that now all that money that we had diverted into the military could now be used to help people. What if millions of people marched to bring an end to deportations without due process, who stood in the streets and chanted and shouted, "Don't deport without due process. Don't 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 deport, because you might be next." Even the judge said, if they can deport someone without due process and feel that as long as they can get that person off of American soil before the courts can intervene, none of us are safe. What if millions of people marched to Jerusalem, Washington, D.C., and demanded that though, like those rocky Christians on that first Palm Sunday, that our nation should be rescued and restored? Rescued from an authoritarian oligarchy and restored to a democracy of the people, by the people, and for the people. Do you think Jesus would survive that march? Or do we think Caesar would send the soldiers to arrest him, try him in secret, and execute him before any appeal could be made to the Supreme Court, just to make an example of him, to discourage anyone from saying anything? Hush up, be quiet, comply. But this is what Palm Sunday is about. When others grow silent in the face of tyranny, shout out. When others turn back in the face of force, cry out. Jesus is looking for some rocky Christians who will keep the gospel story going, who will keep on telling the good news to the poor that there is hope, that there is life, who will tell the good news that God's love is for everyone, and that all people, gay and lesbian, bisexual and trans, all people, black and white, Asian, Latino, all people are due the basic human respect that is due to one created in the image of God and deserves that human dignity that reflects the agape love of God. So keep on keeping on. March on, shout on, roll on, you rocky Christians. Amen.